The cardboard box slips from my fingers, photographs spilling across the weathered porch boards like scattered memories. My grandmother's face smiles up at me from a dozen different moments in time, while my cousin Bryce stands at the door, a stranger with a new key. "You can't be here anymore," he says, the words falling between us like stones. "This is my house now. I have the deed." I blink, certain I've misheard. For 3 weeks, I've scraped wallpaper, polished hardwood, and cataloged every treasured object in this farmhouse. I've spent my entire vacation restoring what Grandma Eleanor loved, my fingers raw from stripping paint, and my back aching from moving furniture. "What are you talking about?" The question comes out thin, barely audible above the autumn breeze, rustling through the maple trees Grandma planted when I was born. Bryce sighs like I'm a child refusing bedtime. The property transfer happened months ago. Everyone knows that. Everyone except me. My mind reels back to the family dinner after the funeral. Aunt Patricia's voice had been warm honey when she'd squeezed my hand across the table. "Since you were closest to Grandma, would you mind helping clear the house? We're all so busy, and you've always had such a special connection to the place." Heads nodded around the table, Uncle Richard, Aunt Patricia, Rachel, and yes, even Bryce, all of them smiling their agreement when I volunteered to handle the cleanup alone. Not once did anyone mention the house no longer belonged to the family trust as we'd always believed. Not once did anyone mention it now belonged to Bryce. I don't understand. I straighten, gathering the scattered photographs with trembling hands. I've been working here for 3 weeks. I've been cataloging family heirlooms, restoring the original fixtures. "And we appreciate that," Bryce cuts in, not sounding appreciative at all. "But now it's time for the professionals to take over. The family decided it would be best if I handled things from here. You've done enough." The trembling in my hands stops. 3 weeks of painstaking work flash before my eyes, the kitchen cabinets I'd stripped and refinished to their original oak luster, the antique light fixtures I'd carefully rewired, the heirloom quilts I'd cleaned and preserved. I reach into my back pocket and pull out my restoration journal, every expense, every hour meticulously documented. "I've invested over $6,000 of my own money in this house," I say, my voice finding its strength. "I replaced the bathroom plumbing. I restored the original hardwood floors. I preserved every family photograph and document I could find." Bryce's expression doesn't change. "That was your choice." My fingers fumble for my phone, scrolling to Aunt Patricia's name. She answers on the third ring, her voice cautious when she hears mine. "Sorrel, dear. Bryce says the house is his. He's changing the locks." A pause. Then, "We thought it would be easier to just let Bryce handle it after you cleaned up." The words hit like a physical blow. "You knew?" My voice cracks. "All of you knew when you asked me to spend my vacation clearing out the house? Sorrel, try to understand. Bryce has such good plans for the property, and you were always so attached to all those old things. We thought—" I hang up before she can finish. The autumn sun slants across the porch, where I'd spent countless afternoons with Grandma Eleanor, shelling peas and listening to her stories. My entire savings account emptied into a house that was secretly given away. My vacation time spent honoring a grandmother whose memory the family had weaponized against me. The betrayal burns cold in my chest as I look up at Bryce, still waiting in the doorway that should have welcomed me home. They knew I would say yes. They knew I would pour my heart into preserving Grandma's legacy. They counted on it, and they used me anyway. 2 days later, the county courthouse looms before me. Red brick and white columns that once seemed dignified now appear imposing. Inside, the records clerk eyes me with bored indifference as I request the property transfer documents for Grandma Eleanor's farmhouse. "Transfer was finalized 6 months ago," she says, sliding a manila folder across the counter. "Pretty straightforward case." My fingers tremble as I open the folder. There it is, Grandma's signature, wavering but legible, transferring full ownership to Bryce Flint. The date stamps mock me. The 12th of February, exactly 6 months before she passed away. The room tilts slightly as I scan the additional notation at the bottom. Transfer, pursuant to family agreement. Transfer, pursuant to family agreement. Family agreement. The words burn into my retinas. I stumble outside, collapsing onto the courthouse steps. Morning sunlight slants across the town square, but a chill spreads through my body despite the warmth. The nausea rises in waves as the pieces click together, the family dinners I wasn't invited to, the hushed phone calls that stopped when I entered rooms, Aunt Patricia's calculated request for me to help clear the house. My phone buzzes with a text from Mrs. Winters, Grandma's neighbor. Contractors just arrived at Eleanor's house. They're measuring the rooms and talking about gutting the kitchen. Is that right? I scroll through Bryce's social media, finding what I feared: plans for Maple Creek farm stay, complete with modernized interiors and booking information. The historical farmhouse Grandma lovingly maintained for 50 years reduced to an Airbnb investment opportunity. My stomach lurches. They're erasing her, erasing us. Uncle Richard's house sits on a hillside overlooking the valley, its manicured lawn a testament to his successful accounting practice. I park my rusted Honda beside Aunt Patricia's gleaming SUV and Rachel's compact car. The gang's all here. The living room feels like a tribunal. Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia occupy the leather sofa, while Rachel perches uncomfortably on an ottoman. I remain standing, surrounded by framed family photographs, holiday gatherings, birthday celebrations, reunions, none containing my face. This wasn't personal, Sorrel, Uncle Richard says, leaning forward with practiced composure. It was practical financial planning. Practical? My voice comes out steadier than I feel. Tricking me into spending 3 weeks and $6,000 restoring a house you'd already given away? Uncle Richard sighs. Eleanor needed convincing, but she eventually understood Bryce could make better use of the property. The tax implications alone. When did you decide? I interrupt. When did you all agree to keep me in the dark? Aunt Patricia fidgets with her pearl necklace. Sorrel, dear, you've always been so good with old things, so sentimental. We knew you'd want everything preserved exactly as it was. While Bryce has vision, Uncle Richard adds, investment opportunity, future thinking. Rachel studies the carpet, shoulders hunched, refusing to meet my eyes. So I'm the family fool? I ask, the silence that follows answering more clearly than words could. The sentimental idiot who would work for free, while Bryce prepared to profit? Uncle Richard's jaw tightens. He needs the investment opportunity. You just want it for sentimental reasons. The truth lands like a slap. They'd assessed our respective needs and judged mine worthless. Uncle Richard pulls out a folder identical to the one from the courthouse. Bryce has contractors scheduled next week. They'll be clearing out the remaining items. Those items include family heirlooms I've cataloged, I say. Grandmother's quilts. Great. Grandfather's handcrafted furniture. Letters from the 1802nd. Worthless junk, Uncle Richard dismisses with a wave. Bryce needs a clean slate. Aunt Patricia attempts her honey voice. Perhaps you'd like to choose 1 or 2 mementos. I spent 3 weeks preserving our history, I snap. I exhausted my savings restoring what Grandma loved. Your choice, Uncle Richard says, shrugging. And now I need to make something very clear. You'll be trespassing if you go back to the property. The implications ripple through me. No legal recourse. No way to recover my costs. The library expects me back Monday, my vacation time depleted. The last physical connection to Grandma Eleanor will be bulldozed into modern neutrality, her garden paved for parking, her hand-built bookshelves ripped out for floating shelves from a catalog. Don't make this difficult, Sorrel. Uncle Richard's voice hardens. The family has decided. I leave without another word, walking past the family photos that exclude me, through the front door nobody bothers to hold open. The evening air smells like coming rain as I slide into my car, hands shaking too badly to insert the key. Then I remember the box of Grandma's journals I'd rescued from the water-damaged corner of the attic. The leather-bound books chronicling 60 years of her life, tucked safely in my apartment because I'd planned to preserve them properly before returning them to the family collection. The collection that would now be discarded as worthless junk. As I drive home that night, clutching Grandma's journals to my chest at every stoplight, I face an impossible choice. Should I accept that the house is gone and preserve what little I have saved? Or should I fight a battle against my entire family that I might not win? When family betrays you for money, is walking away sometimes the wiser path than standing your ground? The journals feel warm against my heart, as if Grandma's voice might rise from their pages with the answer. That same night, the smartphone screen glows in the darkness of my apartment, Bryce's post illuminated like a knife to the heart. Making progress on my new investment property. Captioned beneath photos of sledgehammers smashing through the kitchen cabinets I'd spent 3 days restoring. The oak panels Grandma Eleanor had lovingly oiled every spring now splintered into a heap on her checkerboard floor. My thumb hovers over the comment button. I shouldn't, but the words type themselves. Those cabinets were original to the house. They survived a century until today. The response comes within minutes, not from Bryce, but from a law firm. The cease and desist letter appears in my email with clinical precision, warning against continued harassment and defamatory statements regarding Mr. Flint's legally obtained property. My phone rings before I finish reading. Uncle Richard's name flashes on the screen. "Sorrel, this has gone far enough," he says without greeting. "The family is concerned about your behavior." My behavior? The words catch in my throat. Bryce is demolishing Grandma's kitchen. "It's his kitchen now," Uncle Richard says, his voice taking on the practiced patience he uses with difficult clients. "We've discussed this as a family. Your attachment to the house isn't healthy." "You mean you've discussed it without me?" "Several people have called me, concerned about your comments online. You need to let this go for everyone's sake." After he hangs up, 3 more calls come in succession. Aunt Patricia, Cousin Dave, even my mother's cousin Lynette, who I haven't spoken to in years. Each conversation follows the same script. "Richard says you're causing drama. It was just a misunderstanding. Think about what this is doing to the family." When the screen lights up with an estate sale announcement for Saturday, antique furniture and collectibles, everything must go. I throw the phone across the room. The morning brings no relief. I call in sick to the library, knowing I can't face the gentle inquiries from coworkers. Instead, I spread Grandma's journals across my apartment floor, 16 leather-bound volumes spanning decades. The spines crack reluctantly, as if protecting their secrets. Sleep becomes an afterthought. Coffee mugs multiply around me, leaving sepia rings on my hastily scrawled notes. I create a timeline on craft paper taped to my living room wall, every family event, every house renovation, every mention of who visited and who didn't. By Tuesday, my eyes burn from strain and lack of sleep. The library calls. My supervisor's voice carries concern I don't deserve. "Sorrel, we need you back tomorrow. I understand you're going through something, but we can't cover your shifts indefinitely." I glance at my bank balance, already depleted from the house repairs. A part-time archivist's salary barely covers rent, let alone legal consultation. The attorney I called yesterday quoted a retainer that might as well have been $1 million. "I'll be there, I promise," though my voice sounds hollow even to my own ears. A pattern emerges from the journals. March entries from 3 years ago. Asked Richard to drive me to Dr. Simmons. He's too busy. April. Patricia promised to help with spring cleaning but canceled again. May. Called Bryce about fixing the porch step. He hasn't called back. And then always, Sorrel came today. She brought those almond cookies I like. The isolation of it stings worse than the betrayal. While I visited every week, driving the 45 minutes each way between shifts, the family who now claimed such concern had left Grandma to manage alone. Wednesday night, I find it, pressed between journal pages describing her garden plans, a dried lilac flower, its color faded to the palest lavender. A note in Grandma's careful script beneath it. "From the bush Sorrel and I planted when she was 10. She's the only one who remembers its story." The tears come then, for the first time since Bryce changed the locks. 2 days later, the morning sunlight illuminates Aunt Patricia's garden as I walk up her driveway unannounced. The irises along her fence came from Grandma's garden years ago, divided and replanted, their genetics identical to the ones now likely trampled under contractors' boots. Aunt Patricia looks up from her weeding, her smile faltering when she sees the journal in my hands. "Sorrel, what a surprise. I was just about to call you." "No, you weren't." The words come out steadier than I expected. "But I'm here anyway." Her gloved hands fidget with the trowel. "Honey, I know you're upset, but the house is just a building. You need to move on." "It's not just a building." I step closer, feeling my spine straighten. It's her life story, and all of ours too. I open the journal, finding the marked page. "Bryce visited today." I read aloud. "First time in 2 years. All he talked about was what the property might be worth if I sold it." I don't think Bryce has ever looked past the walls. He sees money. Sorrel sees memory. Aunt Patricia's face changes as I turn to another flagged page. "Richard and Patricia came for Christmas dinner. They brought a man from the bank. They think I don't notice how they whisper when I leave the room. They don't realize how quiet this house becomes when everyone leaves, how it echoes with all the people who aren't here anymore. They indication." My voice breaks, but I continue. "Sorrel called to check if I needed anything from town. She's the only one who asks. The others just tell me what I should do. Aunt Patricia's face has lost its carefully maintained composure. She reaches for the garden fence to steady herself. I didn't know she felt abandoned, she whispers. You never asked. The realization hits me suddenly. I'm not fighting for ownership. I'm fighting for preservation of what the house represents. For the stories that would otherwise be hauled away with the furniture Bryce deems worthless. The next morning, Mrs. Winters appears at my apartment door. Grandma's neighbor of 40 years stands ramrod straight, despite her 86 years, a manila envelope clutched in veined hands. I've written down everything, she announces, pressing the envelope into my hands. How you shoveled Eleanor's walk every snowfall. How you drove her to every doctor's appointment last year. How she told me she wanted you to have her grandmother's china cabinet because you were the only one who knew where it came from. My supervisor calls that afternoon. I have someone you should meet, she says. A friend from law school who works with a pro bono group specializing in elder law. They're interested in your grandmother's case. Row. For the first time in weeks, hope flickers. Where my family values property and investment opportunities, these strangers value history and relationships. They strengthen my resolve to honor what remained unwritten in Grandma's will but clear in her journals her wish that her life's memories be preserved. That night, I compile everything for a formal challenge to the title transfer. The journals document Grandma's confusion during the period when she signed the papers. Mrs. Winters' testimony confirms the pattern of neglect. My meticulous restoration log proves the investment I made in good faith. As I prepare to email the documents to the legal aid group, my phone chimes with a text from Rachel, who has remained conspicuously silent throughout the family drama. I need to talk to you before the hearing. I know something about the day Grandma signed those papers. On the confrontation day, the courthouse feels foreign yet familiar, like Grandma's house after Bryce gutted the kitchen. I stand at the podium, restoration journal open before me, my voice steadier than my hands. Your Honor, over 3 weeks I invested $6,000 and 200 hours restoring Eleanor Flint's historic farmhouse. I maintain unwavering eye contact with Judge Harmon, a man whose silver hair and weathered face remind me of the farmers who used to visit Grandma's porch. I replaced period-accurate fixtures, preserved original hardwoods, and cataloged family artifacts dating back to 1892. I slide 8 before and after photographs across the bench. Each image tells its own story. The kitchen cabinets restored to their original oak luster, the hand-painted dining room trim I'd spent 3 days carefully reviving. I undertook this work, believing I was honoring my grandmother's wishes and preserving our family legacy. My voice catches slightly. At no point was I informed the property had been transferred to my cousin 6 months prior. The judge examines my meticulously organized expense receipts, then glances toward Bryce and Uncle Richard. His eyebrows lift slightly as he studies the property transfer documents. Miss Flint, these restoration costs are substantial for someone of your means, and this documentation is remarkably thorough. He taps my grandmother's journal. And these personal writings, they suggest your grandmother had specific intentions for the property's preservation? Before I can respond, Bryce springs to his feet, his expensive suit a stark contrast to my thrift store blazer. She stole those journals from my property. His voice echoes through the courtroom. Those are private family documents she removed without permission after the legal transfer. The outburst ripples through the small courtroom. From the corner of my eye, I spot Rachel shifting uncomfortably in her seat behind Uncle Richard. Your Honor, Bryce continues, my cousin is manufacturing a sentimental case because she's upset about not inheriting. That's not true. The small voice comes from the back of the courtroom. Rachel stands, her hands visibly trembling. I was there when Grandma signed those papers. Rachel's voice strengthens as she steps forward. Uncle Richard told her it was just financial planning to avoid probate taxes. Grandma kept asking if Sorrel would be okay with it. They told her Sorrel had agreed. Uncle Richard's face flushes crimson. Rachel, this isn't the place. Miss Flint, Rachel, the judge interrupts. Are you willing to provide formal testimony about what you witnessed? Rachel nods, avoiding Uncle Richard's glare. I think that would be appropriate. Judge Harmon turns to the court clerk. Let's get Miss Rachel Flint sworn in. As Rachel takes the stand, Uncle Richard tugs at his collar. The carefully constructed narrative begins crumbling around him as Rachel describes how Grandma Eleanor had repeatedly asked about my approval before signing anything. When the testimony concludes, Judge Harmon removes his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. Miss Sorrel Flint, given these allegations of misrepresentation, I need to ask, do you wish to pursue complete nullification of the property transfer, or would you consider a compromise that preserves the historical elements of the home? I hesitate, my breath catching. Would fighting for full ownership honor Grandma's memory better, or would finding a middle ground that preserved the house's legacy be more in line with her wishes? Before I can answer, Mrs. Winters, Grandma's neighbor of 40 years, approaches the stand. Her testimony paints a vivid picture of the farmhouse's significance to our small community. That wraparound porch hosted the town's first civil rights meeting in 1963, she explains. The Flint farmhouse isn't just a family home, it's a landmark of our shared history. My pro bono lawyer, a former library patron who'd volunteered after hearing my story, presents my documentation next. My client's educational background in archival science and historic preservation makes her uniquely qualified to maintain this property's historical integrity. Even my boss from the library testifies about my professional dedication to preserving community history. In my 30 years as head librarian, I've never seen someone with Sorrel's commitment to honoring the past while making it accessible to future generations. The judge nods thoughtfully. The court recognizes a clear pattern of care and commitment on Miss Sorrel Flint's part, which stands in stark contrast to what appears to be primarily investment interests. My lawyer introduces one final argument. Your Honor, we believe this case also involves unjust enrichment. Mr. Bryce Flint has directly benefited from my client's substantial unpaid labor and personal financial investment, which has significantly increased the property's value. During the recess, Uncle Richard approaches me in the hallway, his confident facade now replaced with nervous energy. We should talk about settling this, he mutters. There's no need to drag this out. Nearby, Aunt Patricia speaks with the court clerk. I never knew all the details, she insists. Richard handled the paperwork. The final blow comes when Bryce's contractor takes the stand, confirming that many of the historical elements I'd painstakingly preserved have already been removed or destroyed. The original banister was torn out Tuesday, he admits, and the built-in china cabinet from the dining room is sitting in a dumpster behind the property. As the day's testimony concludes, Judge Harmon taps his gavel. I'll render my decision after reviewing all documentation, including Mrs. Eleanor Flint's journals. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. I gather my papers, the weight of Grandma's journals heavy in my hands. For the first time since this began, I feel something beyond betrayal, something that feels surprisingly like hope. Next day, the courthouse steps feel cold beneath me as Uncle Richard approaches, his shoes clicking with each deliberate step. Aunt Patricia hovers behind him, her fingers twisting her pearl necklace. Bryce stands slightly apart, arms crossed over his chest, jaw clenched. Sorrel. Uncle Richard's smile stretches too thin across his face. We should talk before we go back in there. I clutch my folder of documents closer. Days and nights of restoration journals, expense receipts, and before and after photographs press against my ribs like armor. The family has discussed things, he continues, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. We think we can find a compromise that keeps our private matters private. Aunt Patricia nods quickly. Family unity is what your grandmother would have wanted, not this public embarrassment. Public embarrassment, I repeat, tasting the words. Is that what you call the truth? Uncle Richard's eyes narrow. Consider your professional reputation, Sorrel. The library board includes several of my golf partners. Small towns talk, and being known as someone who attacks her own family over property. Over lies, I correct him, my voice steadier than my hands. Bryce steps forward, pulling a folded check from his pocket. $2,000. That's fair compensation for your time. Take it, and drop this nonsense. The amount hits me like a slap. $2,000. Less than a third of what I spent restoring floors he plans to tear out, plumbing he'll rip from the walls, fixtures I polished by hand. That's your idea of fair? The folder in my arm suddenly feels heavier with purpose. The bailiff calls us back inside before anyone can answer. The courtroom wood gleams under fluorescent lights as I approach the stand. Judge Harmon's eyes follow me, assessing. His silver hair catches the light as he leans forward. Miss Flint, I understand you wish to present additional evidence? My voice finds its strength in the quiet room. Yes, Your Honor. One by one, I place my exhibits on the table, the leather-bound restoration journal with dated entries and photographs, the stack of receipts, each one highlighting materials purchased with my savings, the contractor quotes showing what professional restoration would have cost. The wall of evidence grows, physical proof of every hour and dollar I invested, believing I was preserving family history. And this, I say, placing my grandmother's journal gently atop the stack, contains entries from the last year of my grandmother's life. I opened to a marked page and read her words aloud. The 15th of September. Sorrel spent the weekend helping me organize the attic. She understands why these things matter, the stories they tell. When I'm gone, she's the one who should preserve this place. Not to sell it, but to keep our history alive. The courtroom remains silent as I close the journal. Your Honor, my pro bono attorney says, rising to stand beside me, we've documented the extensive work my client performed under false pretenses. We're asking the court to consider co-stewardship based on sweat equity and the deceased's clearly documented intentions. I step forward. This isn't about ownership. It's about honoring a life and preserving our history. The attorney places a folder before the judge. We're proposing historical designation for the property with shared family access. My client doesn't seek to exclude her family from the house only to ensure its preservation. Judge Harmon studies me over his reading glasses, expression thoughtful. An unusual proposal, Miss Flint. Most people in your position would simply seek full ownership. The house deserves better than being a prize in a family fight, I answer. My grandmother believed that. So do I. 2 days later, we gather again. The courtroom is fuller now. Mrs. Winters sits in the front row alongside my boss from the library and several neighbors I recognize from my grandmother's street. Word has spread about our family's private war. Judge Harmon clears his throat, silencing the murmurs. In the matter of the Flint property transfer, I've reviewed all submitted evidence and testimony. He looks directly at Bryce. While I find the transfer legally executed, I also find compelling evidence of unjust enrichment and moral obligation. Uncle Richard shifts in his seat. The property will remain under Mr. Bryce Flint's name, the judge continues, but with conditions. My heart sinks, then steadies as he continues. First, Mr. Flint must reimburse Miss Sorrel Flint for all documented expenses related to the property's restoration, totaling $6,743. Bryce's face reddens. Second, the court grants co-stewardship rights to Miss Flint for purposes of historical preservation and documentation. Any structural modifications to the property must be approved by both parties for a period of 5 years. The judge leans forward, removing his glasses. This house represents significant family history, Mr. Flint. Your grandmother's journals make clear her intentions regarding preservation. While she may have signed the property to you, the court finds a clear moral obligation to honor the spirit of her wishes. As we rise, a woman approaches with a notepad. Millbrook Gazette, she says, smiling. I'd love to interview you about saving your grandmother's historic farmhouse. Our readers appreciate these stories of preservation. Bryce pushes past us, face flushed with humiliation. Uncle Richard hurries after him while Aunt Patricia stands frozen, uncertain which direction to choose. Later, as people filter out of the courthouse, Bryce catches my arm in the hallway. This arrangement won't work, he says, voice tight with frustration. The restrictions, the media attention, it's not what I signed up for. You wanted an investment property, I remind him. That's still what you have. I'm offering to sell my rights to you at a reduced rate. His words come fast, desperate. Take your precious museum. I'm done with this. The offer dangles between us. Everything I fought for suddenly within reach. But my bank account holds barely enough for next month's rent after everything I've spent. I can't afford to buy you out. I admit. Figure it out. He releases my arm. Because I'm not playing house curator for the next 5 years. That evening I stand alone in the partially gutted kitchen. The original farmhouse sink I'd rescued from the barn and restored sits balanced on sawhorses, waiting for installation that may never happen. My fingertips trace the worn edges, feeling the ghostly imprints of my grandmother's hands washing decades of family dishes. The walls around me, half stripped, half preserved, tell our story in layers of paint and paper. I press my palm against the oldest layer, exposed where Bryce's contractors began demolition. I don't have the money to save this house, but somehow, I can't walk away from the only walls that remember who we really were. The brass key slides into the lock with a satisfying click. 6 months after the courthouse battle, I push open the farmhouse door and breathe in the scent of beeswax polish and fresh paint. Light streams through windows I've spent weekends restoring, catching dust motes that dance above the refinished hardwood floors. "Morning, Sorrel, Mrs." Winters calls from the kitchen, where she's arranging wildflowers in Grandma Eleanor's cut glass vase. Behind her, 3 volunteers from the Historical Society carefully hang framed photographs along the hallway. The school group arrives at 11. I remind them, my voice carrying a confidence that still sometimes surprises me. No longer the woman who dropped family photographs in shock on this very porch, I now move through these rooms with purpose, pointing out original fixtures and sharing the stories embedded in every corner. The library board's decision last month still feels like a dream, a partial leave to develop what we're calling the Memory House as a community archive project. Every family deserves to have their history preserved, I told them during my presentation, not just the wealthy or famous. In the kitchen, the same space where Bryce had planned to install granite countertops and tear out the hand-built cabinets, 20 folding chairs form a semicircle. The worn oak table that's witnessed 4 generations of family meals now holds pamphlets about our community preservation initiative. I smooth my hand over its surface, feeling the slight depression where Grandma Eleanor rolled out pie crusts every Sunday. "Is this where people will share their stories?" asks Deanna, one of the high school volunteers. "This is exactly where people have always shared their stories," I answer, placing a vintage tape recorder at the center of the table. "Now we're just making sure those stories get preserved." The front door creaks, and I turn to find Uncle Richard standing awkwardly in the hallway, a cardboard box clutched in his arms. "I found these in the attic," he says, not quite meeting my eyes. Seemed like they belonged here. Inside the box, albums filled with photographs spanning 7 decades, each one meticulously labeled in Grandma's handwriting. "Thank you," I manage, the words coming easier than I expected. When he leaves, I join the small gathering in the parlor, Mrs. Winters, the legal team that fought pro bono for our compromise, and 3 colleagues from the library who've spent weekends stripping wallpaper and cataloging artifacts. "Look what I rescued," Rachel announces, pushing through the door with Grandma's maple rocking chair balanced awkwardly in her arms. Bryce had it in storage. I told him it was either coming back here or I was telling the newspaper about the missing journal pages. We place it by the window where Grandma always sat, angling it to catch the afternoon light. Jennifer from the legal team raises her teacup. To Eleanor Flint, who knew houses remember who loved them. We drink to that, teacups clinking in the sunlight. Later, as the first school group files through the front hall, their voices bright with curiosity, I stand on a stepladder and carefully mount a brass plaque beside the door. In memory of Eleanor Flint, because houses remember who loved them. The grant funding came through last week, making the Community Memory Library official. I scan the faces of children settling cross-legged on the parlor floor for our first Storytelling Saturday program. Before we begin, I unfold the letter Rachel finally gave me last month. "Thank you for fighting for something we didn't even know we were losing," she wrote in shaky handwriting. As I place Grandma's teacup back on the windowsill where she always kept it, I wonder about the memories in your own life. Are there places or things that hold your family's stories? And if they were threatened, would you find the courage to stand up for them, even when standing alone?